So, okay, well, I'm glad to see that we have a few faces beyond our research teams here today. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to, this is
If I could just interject
Oh,
though,
sure,
that
please.
even though our numbers are few, this is being recorded
Yes,
and it will be up on our website. So it'll be available for others as well. And we do get a significant number of hits.
yes, yes, we posted our first virtual undergraduate showcase on the ORG, the Office of Research and Grants YouTube channel, and we'll be posting this one as well. So this is our second virtual showcase. We actually started doing undergraduate research showcases in the fall of 2016. It was a new initiative. When I came in as director of undergraduate research, we wanted to highlight student accomplishments on campus beyond your own departments. So it started this new tradition of university-wide recognition of undergraduate research accomplishments. So today we have as our speakers, research teams from the Department of History and Political Science, and also the Department of Kinesiology, both of whom received a competitive Scholarly Undergraduate Research Experience Award, or SURE, in the last SURE cycle. And not only do we commend these students and their faculty mentors for their important scholarship, but we also seek to learn from them about the origins, the challenges, and the benefits of completing their research projects. And these students are not alone. Many APU undergraduates present research at academic conferences, publish in academic journals, or both. And I know because I provide travel funding for most of the students. And though celebrated in individual departments, these important undergraduate accomplishments are largely unknown in the larger APU community. So to better broadcast student accomplishments, I launched these showcases, and I also revised the undergraduate research program website to better highlight student accomplishments. And you also can find information there, the application for conference travel to seek conference travel funding. You can see a list of recent student research presentations and other relevant information. The application for the 2022 SURE cycle is already up on the website, and the deadline is April 1st. And one of the things that's a little bit new this year is that students can apply to both the SURE grant and also a program that's now in its second year, the Richter Scholars Fellowship, which is open to undergraduate and graduate students. So we are allowing students to apply to both for the same project, as long as each award funds different pieces of that project. So, and I do want to welcome and acknowledge Dr. Donald Isaac is the Executive Director of Research and Grants, and I am the Director of Undergraduate Research. So we are happy to be here today. And before we begin our discussion, I'd like to take about 90 seconds to show I'm going to share my screen here. Right. Alrighty. So these are our two research teams. And we'll be discussing their projects. And I have some questions for them about the origin of the projects, but I'm going to take a moment here, about 90 seconds, as I said, and show this YouTube video. This is on our APU YouTube channel. And this just sort of gives us more information about the SURE Award for those of you who are interested in applying. Again, the deadline is April 1st.
The Scholarly Undergraduate Research Experience, or SURE, is an annual competition that awards funding to undergraduate research projects guided by full-time faculty mentors, with the expectation that recipients will disseminate their scholarship at an academic conference or in a scholarly publication, and our past SURE recipients have had great success in both arenas.
For me, it was an opportunity to pursue my own independent research under the guidance of a mentor, of someone who can give me more insight into what I wanted to look into.
We're completely collaborators. I have met with Juliana over the years. We're involved with coming up with ideas and advancing the work.
It's been very instrumental and invaluable just to my own personal and professional development. Because of the SURE Award, we were able to go even deeper in our research.
So it's my hope with the SURE Award to instill confidence in students who may not believe they can do research, who never thought of themselves as researchers, or who come from a discipline where research isn't traditionally an opportunity that presents itself. It's important for students to have opportunities like SURE because it prepares them for their future, whether that be in research or in their chosen profession.
Okay, so for any of our viewers, if you're interested in applying for the SURE Award, the applications are open. You can contact me for more information if you have any questions. You're also in for a treat today. We have two teams who received the SURE Award who will be discussing their experience with this research. So the two projects are Deterrence and Mutually Assured Destruction in the Age of Ballistic Missile Defense Systems. And this is student researchers Abigail Brown, who is an international relations major and an honors humanities major. And we also, and her mentor is unable to make it today, so we'll be hearing just from her. And also we have another team, the Kinesiophobia Prevalence among college athletes. And our student researcher is Lindsey McNeely, and her faculty mentor is Robert Dudley, and they're here to talk to us about their experience. So I do have some questions that will sort of guide our discussion today, and then I'll open it up at the end to questions from those who are in attendance in our audience. So I always like to ask the question of my student researchers, how did your research project begin? Did it originate, was it a class assignment? Did you have a conversation with a mentor? Did you have a conversation with friends and then you went to a mentor? I'm really interested in hearing the origin of the project. Lindsey, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I was on a biomechanics research team last spring with Dudley and some other students. And we kind of were just looking at articles and like kind of diving into the field of biomechanics and getting interested in that. And so from that, Dudley presented us the idea of like the SURE grant and doing our own research. And he was like open to being a mentor for us. So I thought that that was a really cool opportunity, and I really liked the type of things that we were learning about and the topics that we were discussing relating to like biomechanics and kind of like psychology as well. So yeah, I got connected through that, and then we just kind of started that research from there.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you. Professor Dudley, do you have anything to add about your recollections of the origins of the project?
Yeah, so I have been kind of working with a small group of students outside of class, trying to read through biomechanics literature, develop research questions. And so part of that is, working on my own research, and then also creating an environment for students to kind of to explore their own questions kind of under that umbrella of that, things that I'm capable of mentoring, under my area of expertise. And so I have a really amazing group of students, and Lindsey is one of them. And so when she approached me and was like, hey, let's do this SURE grant, I was like all on board. And so it's kind of a little bit of, we arrived at the let's do the SURE grant and let's do this project at the same time, kind of what her project would look like and how we would execute that. And yeah, but it kind of came out of our interactions, our kind of ongoing interactions as part of my research team.
That's great. Lindsey, you mentioned something about psychology. Did I hear that right? Sort of the blending of the two? Was that part of the origins of the project too?
Yeah, so kinesiophobia is the fear of movement, kind of like usually related to injury or pain. And so there's like the physical movement and like biomechanics side of it, but then there's also the psychology side of it as like the fear aspect.
So did you have mentors? Had you been taking classes in the department, maybe with psychology professors? Was that sort of part of the origins as well?
I am a psychology minor, so I have been taking those classes, but mostly the origins were like, we had been reading a lot of articles about kinesiophobia and about how fear related to movement. And so that kind of was the main thing that led me to this topic.
That sounds like a really nice way to sort of bring both of your interests, your major and your minor, together and do a project. I'm really happy that worked out.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Abigail, do you want to tell us a little bit more about, or to tell us about the origins of your project?
Yes, so my project stemmed from a paper that I completed in Dr. Palm's national security course in the fall of 2020. So that was primarily looking at the Aegis ballistic missile defense system on the island of Guam. And that kind of stemmed from just looking at different areas of national security. And also I was completing a internship with the American Enterprise Institute, and I was able to listen to a couple of scholars present on their research in the Foreign and Defense Department. So I was able to be exposed to just the world of national security and how complex missile defense is for the United States. So I was really interested in looking at the origins of where did this come from. And in one of those presentations, I was kind of exposed to the idea that while ballistic missile defense is a positive thing, it also creates a lot of complexities for national security and diplomacy. So that's where my interest was piqued in this topic. And I was able to approach Dr. Palm, who was open to being my faculty mentor for this project.
Great. So do you recall, you heard about the SURE opportunity and you came to him with this, or you just wanted to do more research on it and then SURE presented itself?
I wanted to do more research on it, and SURE presented itself, and it was a perfect opportunity to be funded, which was such a special opportunity.
Yes, I'd love to hear stories like that where it works out, where this research is already bubbling and it's already begun, and then we sort of are able to come forward and provide the funding to make that a reality. So thank you for sharing that. I want to ask now of the student researchers what the research process was like. So I've done many showcases, and I've had students tell me all sorts of stories about challenges, about obstacles, about unexpected turns in research. And anyone who is an active researcher, an active scholar, and I think most of the faculty on this call are, we understand that sometimes you have a very clear idea of where you're going to go, and then the documents or the research takes you in a different direction. So I'm going to ask, so the questions I'd like to know are, did your research unfold the way you thought it did? Usually it doesn't, but I want to see if it did for you all. And what kinds of challenges did you face along the way? Abigail, let's start with you.
Yes, so I think mine definitely unfolded along the way. I had an idea of what my research would show me, but it was actually the opposite. So I was able to kind of work through my thesis and finally settle on a thesis after my research. I think I came with a misconception that I would start with a fully formed thesis, research, and be able to support that. But I came across a lot of different documents. I studied a lot of the history of ballistic missile defense, which brought about a lot of different conflicting stories. History is fluid, so it was a very interesting process. I think that one of the challenges I came across was being able to feel like I had a secure idea of what national security looked like. As an undergraduate student at APU, I don't have access to a lot of national security documents. However, I was actually able to interview a couple of leading scholars in the field. So I felt like I had a better idea and a little bit more authority behind what I was writing about for my policy proposals after being able to get some interviews with those individuals. However, gaining those interview opportunities was really hard. I would say I spent at least 10 to 15 hours just cold calling, sending emails in order to have someone to spend their time. I think that as an undergraduate, it's really hard to break into the field of research, and I definitely wouldn't have been able to without the SURE grant. And also, I think that some scholars are hesitant to give their time for undergraduate researchers, but I think with the SURE grant making these opportunities available to students, undergraduate researchers are able to gain the experience that I did and hopefully be able to continue doing research at a higher level in the future.
Right, and that's exactly our hope, is to sort of start students off, give them the experience as undergrads when they have mentors to work very closely with them, and then to move forward and to sort of get a taste for what research is like and to continue on and be active scholars. I wanted to ask, when you interviewed those scholars, did Dr. Palm, because I know he has, experience in the field, and this is why you've chosen him to be your mentor. What was his role in helping you, or did he play a role in helping you to secure any of those interviews?
Yeah, he was very helpful in that. He, yeah, I think the biggest thing that he did for me was exposing me to a lot of different think tanks and areas where people were researching national security. So the American Enterprise Institute, I had contacts with them through my internship, but Dr. Palm introduced me to the RAND Corporation, which was previously a government-run think tank, and it now is its own private think tank. But he was very helpful in pointing me towards certain individuals who might have expertise in the field. He also pointed me to some individuals who were previous students of APU who were working in national security at the time, which was extremely helpful.
Great. That's good. And it's nice to hear students go through the very real struggle that scholars do when you try to get the information that you need and things just don't always work out. I work in archives in Mexico, and sometimes I would go to Mexico and the archivist just wouldn't show up. So I couldn't get in, and I would go every day and sit outside the front door. Maybe the archivist would come in for 3 hours, maybe the archivist wouldn't come in. And it's just very, very different based on cultural differences. And you have to be really patient, and you have to be able to adapt to the challenges that you face. So I really enjoy hearing about undergraduates who learn about that firsthand, that you need to sort of be flexible and adapt and realize that it's not going to unfold necessarily the way that you think it will. But sometimes you find better results when you're challenged in these ways. Thank you. So Lindsey, why don't you share a little bit about how your experience unfolded in your research, whether you had, what kinds of challenges that you might have faced?
Yeah, so I think it was probably a little bit different than I was expecting. With doing research with like human subjects, no matter what, you have to go through an IRB process to start the research and get approved by the school. And so that took a lot of work and a lot of time to go through, and it's like just pages and pages of details to fill out. So that was definitely unexpected on my end, but Dr. Dudley was a big help with that, helping me understand how to answer the questions and like what kind of details I would need to include. So that was an interesting part of the process, to learn how research is brought about and how it's approved. But then once we were able to do that, we got approved and then made a survey that we sent out to all of the college athletes at APU. And it was just a simple Google form, so that was nice. But I think one of the challenges was just getting people to sometimes respond. We like kind of had to give them a little incentive so that they would fill out the survey, and we got actually a pretty good amount of responses, so we were happy with that. But it was just a lot more detailed process than I think I was expecting in the first place.
So once you had the surveys completed, how did the rest of your research unfold? Did it then turn into such a more, and sort of an easier, more fluid process at that point?
Yeah, once we were able to collect the data, we just went through and analyzed it and ran statistics on it and started making graphs and things for the conference that we went to. So it was pretty easy from there on out to just analyze the data and put it in a sheet and then be able to make our resources from it.
Okay, so it just took longer. You weren't expecting all the details that go into it, and sometimes you really do need to spend a lot of time on sort of these administrative pieces before you can move into the research that maybe you're anxious to get started on collecting data, but you need to do all these other things, put them in place first. Professor Dudley, would you share with us your side of the experience with the challenges, of any challenges you faced in this project?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lindsey kind of elaborated on one of the challenges of human subject research. And I mean, it sounds a little familiar to your experience of, waiting for your archivist, is just trying to get subjects. And so thankfully in Lindsey's project, we had a wide subject pool. So our inclusion criteria was just any collegiate athlete, and we just chose to constrain it only to APU. But that's not necessarily common in human subject research. Usually we have like much tighter controls on who we we include in our research, and that can be like a really big challenge. But yeah, as Lindsey said, we had, we used some incentives like a raffle drawing in order to I don't want to say rope subjects in, but encourage subjects to participate. Because yeah, we were looking for as much participation as possible, and that seemed to help. So over the first 2 weeks of the semester, Lindsey was able to collect data on almost 100 athletes. So a pretty decent size. And then yeah, once we had that collected, it unfolded, and it was nice to be able to, I think Lindsey's analysis, it was a really great mirror of not only what she was learning in class, in the classes that we've talked in like classes that I've had her in, but also classes that she had taken, in other areas of the university, like for instance, math or statistics. There's a really nice overlap between the work that we were doing in the analysis and then the things that she was learning elsewhere. So.
And that's really wonderful to hear, because we are all whole scholars, whole people. We bring so many different bits of our training together, and often we have unique combinations of training that can help us to do this project in a way that nobody else can. So it's nice for undergraduates to have that exposure and to understand that we all come at perhaps the same data in different ways based on what our experience is, as well as our goals for the research. Right? Good. I'm wondering if, Lindsey, you mentioned that you attended a conference. So I want to ask how you've disseminated for the student researchers to begin speaking about how you may have disseminated your research, or, whether you've presented at a conference or you've written reports, and how did that experience shape the research, knowing that you were preparing it, to share it. Lindsey, do you want to start, since you mentioned the conference?
Yes, so I attended the Southwest ACSM American College of Sports Medicine conference last October to present my research, and we brought a poster with all of our data and our results and everything that we found. And I got to be in a poster session where there were a lot of other undergrad and graduate researchers in a big room, and we all had posters up, and people were just like faculty, students, people from other schools, or like professionals were walking around and got to just like kind of chat with you about your poster and your research, which was really cool. And I got a lot of interest in my poster because I was kind of one of the only posters there that integrated some other I had the psychology aspect. A lot of them were like very straightforward biomechanical studies, which is also like super cool. But I also had like another element to it. So I got a lot of questions about my research and a lot of interest of people wanting to come up and see what it was about. And also a lot of people who did not know what kinesiophobia was, which is pretty common. It's like not something that's talked about a lot, but it was very cool to share what I had learned and just my whole experience, and like what kinesiophobia was with like all of these people.
Right. I really like what you said about how you generated a lot of interest because it was multidisciplinary. You came at it with sort of a complexity of I don't know, training and analysis. Professor Dudley, did you accompany Lindsey to the conference?
Yes,
Can you tell us a
and
little
I
bit
took
about what
lots
your
of photos of
experience
her.
Oh, great.
Standing by her poster. Yeah, so yeah, it was an awesome experience. So I when I was a graduate student, I kind of attended the Southwest ACSM conference and presented research there. So it has been a really nice like full circle experience to present research at that conference, and then now mentor students who are presenting research at this regional conference. And it's very well attended. So it's basically the entire Western United States. And there's a bunch of students. And actually, even since I attended and presented, the shift has gone more from undergraduate student presenters to graduate student presenters. So I think I was really impressed with how well Lindsey and her project stood out amongst the kind of sea of graduate student poster presenters. And so that was really nice, a really good experience to see that and to see her shine and really see her come into like, being able to talk about the project. I'm really big on the scientific communication part of things, and so that ability to have conversations with others is something that I try to teach to my students. So yeah.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. And how nice too, to sort of be able to bring your own students to the same conferences. That must be really nice, feeling to do that. Abigail, I think you wrote up some report. I don't know whether you've been to a conference, but can you tell us a little bit more about how you've disseminated your research?
Yes, so I compiled my research into a paper, a lengthy research paper, and I presented it at the Northeastern Political Science Conference, which was online. It was going to be in Boston, but it was moved online. But it was a wonderful experience. I was able to present my paper along with students who were, in contrast to what Lindsey was speaking about, the political science department had a wide range of papers. The one that I remember most was how Bitcoin can assist in the economy in Somalia. So very diverse group of papers that I was able to present, which was an amazing experience. So that looked like submitting my paper for approval with just the precis. And then a couple weeks before the conference, I sent in my research paper, and a professor who was willing to serve as the discussion leader read through our papers. So there were 5 other researchers there in our specific section. He read through our papers. We presented our research at the conference. Then he gave us feedback based on our presentation and the paper that he had already read, which was really great. He was able to give us each pointers of how we could really focus in on points of interest. And he was also able to assist us in cutting out some of the research that we had presented, which may have just assisted in context. So for my research, there was a high level of history, which I had to study in order to fully understand what deterrence really looks like now versus what it looked like in the Cold War era. So I think disseminating my research for this conference specifically in what I presented, I think I learned for future projects that history has a lot more relevance to the researcher than it does to potential policy proposals, which I wasn't prepared for. I think when I was getting ready to present, I realized I had to cut out a lot of the history aspect and really narrow down and present on the policy proposals. But that doesn't mean that the history was any less valuable. I think it aided my project immeasurably. And when I was asked questions about the policy proposals, I was able to give a lot of context of historically, this is what has worked and hasn't worked. But I think that going forward, if I were to research again, I think I would continue to do a high level of historical background, but for presenting specifically, I would focus on policy proposals just so the audience doesn't get lost in the weeds of the history, because I think sometimes that could be most interesting to the researcher, but a little confusing for the audience. So that was what my dissemination process looked like.
Well, I find that really fascinating. I know you're speaking to a historian, so I understand all about the importance of history. But no, I see that. I see how important it is to understand the context of it. And it's so that when you do have the questions, you are able to answer them. And this is one of the things you learn from doing research and doing presentations is you can't present everything. Your knowledge, you're going to have much more knowledge on the project than you can fit in a 10 to 15-minute presentation or in a poster. So that's where the questions and the conversations come in. And that's where people can really learn about how much of an expert you've become in your project. So there's a lot that you don't share, but you have the knowledge. So that's an interesting lesson to learn so young as undergraduates, that's sort of how research works, that you share a portion of it, the most important pieces, but you have to have that background understanding of how everything works together. So it's nice to hear that you learned that lesson as you presented. I'm wondering how the SURE, we've been talking about this sort of indirectly, but how was the SURE experience beneficial, like particular ways that the students could identify for me, how having this SURE award was beneficial to you? Lindsey, do you want to start?
Yes, I think Without this SURE program, I would not have even thought of doing any research project on my own. I would have just continued like doing the things that we had been doing in my research team and just kind of going along with that. But I think that doing the project on my own and like being a part of the research, all behind the scenes and like everything that goes into having your own research project was really interesting. And I definitely would not have thought that that was like possible or thought that that was an opportunity that I could have without the SURE program to kind of back that up.
Oh, that makes me so happy to hear that I was able to fund something that you might not have done otherwise. Thank you. I'm happy. Thank you for sharing that. Abigail?
Yes, I would say that this program was beneficial in two different ways. One is, I think personally, this was a really beneficial program in that it gave me a lot of confidence in that someone was able to look at something that I was interested in and give me an opportunity to be funded to research it. I think as undergraduates, we focus on, the projects we do in class, and sometimes they can just feel like assignments, but being able to have adults at my university look at what I was interested in and say, yes, we trust you and empower you to go forth and research this. And we trust you to be responsible. And we know that this will be beneficial for you. I think that was really empowering for me personally. And then in a professional sense, this project really helped me as just a professional in the field of international affairs. I was able to complete another internship with the American Enterprise Institute, which was different from the original one that started this project. And it was heavily research-based, and it was a very similar, I was given a lot of responsibility for an undergraduate student, for an intern. And I think that because I spent the summer researching, when I was given larger projects that would actually go to assist scholars when they would present in Congress, when they would testify, I one, felt confident enough in my research capabilities, and two, was able to parse through research and get to, I guess, like the meat of different research proposals and be able to know what is and what isn't important, because I'd spent all summer in the weeds of different articles and things like that. So I think in the professional and personal sense, this experience was really beneficial for me.
I'm so pleased to hear that, Abigail, and especially that you had you were able to take your experience for sure, and you've been using it already, the experience of researching, and you're using it with the AEI internship in ways that affect policy, right? That's so exciting that you're able to do this as an undergraduate, and that it started from this interest in this class with Dr. Palm, and then you kind of move forward. So I'm very pleased to hear that. It's so wonderful. That's why I really enjoy having these showcases. I learned so many wonderful details about the students and their experience that sometimes it's difficult to communicate when some of you email with me. So I appreciate this. And Professor Dudley, I'm going to ask you if you could talk a little bit about your experience as a faculty mentor, how you felt that being a faculty mentor for a SURE team was beneficial to you as a person, as a scholar, in sort of any way that you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, so I think what's so unique about APU in particular and the SURE grant process is that it involves undergraduate students. And so I think it's often, we often forget that that's a pretty unique opportunity for undergraduate students to be involved in research. So, if you go to other institutions, that doesn't happen until graduate school. And so I think that is a big strength of the program. And from a faculty perspective, what it kind of helps me do is really, as I kind of mentioned earlier, bridge that gap between classroom material and practical applications and connections to the scientific literature. So there's only so much kind of research and stuff that I can present in the classroom environment, without the student actually getting in the weeds and experiencing it. And so as Lindsey was mentioning, her ability to fill out an IRB application and work through that process of how we protect research subjects, and that entire process is really valuable and not something that I may typically cover in a class, but we can talk about concepts and then that we bridge that gap. So but it also keeps me on my toes because I have to be kind of available to mentor through that entire process, which can be it can be challenging, right? Because it's not like I could just say, okay, here's a graduate student, like, okay, go do this, and then send them away. It's like, no, like I want to be part of this process, and we're gonna kind of do this together, and we're both gonna learn. So it's a really unique opportunity for mentorship from the faculty perspective, and I think really, really valuable.
I agree. And you said something towards the end there about learning together. And that personally is my favorite. That's my favorite reason for teaching, is to learn together with my students, to learn from them in the classroom, documents that I've read multiple times, but I bring them to the classroom and I have students see them in a new way and learn from my students. So I appreciate you pointing this out, that it is different from working with graduate students. And a lot of faculty at APU don't have the opportunity. My department doesn't have graduate students. So in my department, this is really the only opportunity we might have to work with students so directly with research. And it gives sort of a sense of what it might be like. But it's different because, as you pointed out, with undergraduates, you're going to be a much more close mentor, because they're learning the skills about how to do research and maybe don't even know how to get started. So you have to mentor them through that process. Whereas graduate students, you sort of say, here, you need to do these things, go read these books, go, and then they come back later. So it is a unique experience to work with undergraduates. For the students, the last question I'd like to ask you before we open to the audience for questions is there any advice you would like to impart to students interested in doing research, who might come and ask you for some advice on how to get started? Abigail, do you want to share any sage wisdom you might have?
I have two things that I learned and would do differently. The first is to, as soon as, if you're given the opportunity to do the SURE grant, to immediately start looking into research conferences. I found that I started looking in about the middle of the summer, and by that time, a lot of the applications had actually closed in order to present research. So immediately start looking into conferences you can present at, and have some lined up while you're applying. The second would be to create a schedule for yourself. I think that when I thought about doing this research over the summer, it was a positive because I would have so much free time. However, things happen and we're busy individuals. So I think that creating a schedule that you'd like to stick to, and then sharing that with your faculty mentors so that they can share in the accountability process, that was really helpful for me and Dr. Palm, just to have someone checking in on me and making sure that we were both holding each other accountable to myself doing the research, and then contrastly, Dr. Palm having enough content to review. I think that once I was able to establish a schedule, it was so much easier to stay on track. So those are the two things that I would advise for future researchers.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful to have this practical advice to think about. And different disciplines might have academic conferences that might open and close at different times, but it is really helpful immediately say, okay, part of the SURE grant is that there's an expectation of disseminating your research in some way, either through writing a journal entry, co-authoring with your faculty mentor, or taking it to a conference. So there is that expectation, and looking for those opportunities early on. That's good advice, and having a schedule as well. It's always helpful because, again, life happens and things change and we think we have all this time, but really outlining what you're going to do, even within one day, within a week and then within a month, then that helps you to kind of stay on task. Very good, thank you. Lindsey, what advice do you have for students seeking to do research?
I would just say, if you're interested in doing the research and if it piques your interest at all, you should just go for it. And it doesn't really matter if you feel like you're not capable of doing it, or if you don't know how the process will work, or what this process is going to entail, because I think that's the beauty of having your faculty mentor to help you along is very, very beneficial. And you're not going to be doing it alone. So if you have the opportunity and you know that there's something you're interested in that you would want to research, and reaching out to a faculty member and just seeing if they're on board, they will most likely love to help you out. And you're just going to learn so much through the process, and it would be just a great experience overall. and a really growing experience. So I think without hesitation, you should just go for it.
Thank you. Wonderful. So we have some time now for questions from the audience. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about perhaps the results of some of the research, since we haven't discussed that yet, or you have any other questions relevant to the SURE process, I'll go ahead and open it up to the audience.
Well, I'll start. So Lindsey, let me kind of be like one of those people at your conference and ask you to tell me a little bit more what you mean by the word kinesiophobia. You kind of mentioned it at the beginning, but and what I heard you say was something like you're afraid to move one's body or something like that. But I think it's much more involved in that. So I was wondering if first of all you would just kind of explain a little bit more what that is, and secondly, could you mention one or two things that you learned that you were surprised at as you went through your research, maybe unexpected outcomes?
Yeah, so kinesiophobia is movement-related fear that usually comes from injury or in relation to pain. And so we see this a lot in chronic pain patients because obviously if they're moving their body and it hurts and they're in constant pain, they're going to be kind of afraid of doing certain movements. But the main idea behind our project was kind of to see if there's a general movement-related fear, kinesiophobia, among just college athletes, like kind of normal people.
Would it be a phobia if excuse me for interrupting, but would it be a phobia if they're actually having pain? I mean, it seemed like a phobia is more like you're afraid that something might happen. Whereas, you're afraid somebody might attack you, or, what I mean, you're afraid you might fall, but you're talking about people who actually are in pain.
Yeah, so it's more of just the fear of movement, that it can be related to they already have pain, or the lingering, I don't want to get injured, kind of in the back of their head, or previous experiences of being injured that can lead them to just have the fear of movement or certain movements. And so you asked about kind of the findings that we had.
Yeah.
Something that was interesting was generally among the population that we had, we found a moderate score of kinesiophobia, which was kind of interesting. But we didn't really find a lot of statistically significant differences between sport or population, which is okay. But it was just interesting to see that there is a general sense of kinesiophobia among the college athletes that we sampled.
And I also had a question then for Abigail. Actually, it seems like this is just a comment first. It seems like your research is pretty relevant today. I mean, hopefully it's not, but it's almost going that way. Oh yeah, so you talked about your thesis changing as you went through your project. Did the actual question change, or did your answer to the question change? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, so my question changed a little bit. My answer changed drastically. When I initially started this research, I was really interested in missile defense just as a concept, technically and theoretically. And then I was also interested in mutually assured destruction. And I think the fallacies within that, whether that still holds true. And then the first scholar that I interviewed, Danielle Pletka from AEI, essentially, she right out of the gate said, mutually assured destruction doesn't have a lot of purchase anymore. And in fact, a lot of current scholars don't really regard it as something that's reliable within the field of national security. So I was interested in researching mutually assured destruction and how it applies to our national security today. And then kind of immediately I realized that mutually assured destruction really isn't something that scholars and or policymakers really take into account when they look at national security policy. But that led me to developing my thesis into a more specific way, which was focusing specifically on deterrence rather than mutually assured destruction specifically.
So, I mean, just applying it today, I mean, when you think of what's happening in Ukraine, are you, and I'm sure you're not in the, on the inside on this, but are you suggesting that they're not even considering mutually assured destruction as a problem, that whatever happens, or could you be the resident expert on that topic?
Yes. So in my opinion, looking at that, so I think in the Cold War, you had the USSR and the United States looking at each other and kind of staring each other down. Both had nuclear weapons, and they were able to, they had what was called first strike capability. So that was the idea that, if the USSR hit the United States first, then our missile silos, our nuclear weapon silos would be taken out, and that you wanted to have like the first strike capability. So you wanted to be the first person who struck first. However, with the addition of missile defense, you kind of have this interesting dynamic added, which is that the USSR could fire, but those missiles could be shot down by our missile defense systems, leaving our missile silos capable of a second strike. So sending those missiles back. So essentially, before you had missile defense, there was this mutually assured destruction of, okay, if you fire and I see that those missiles are coming, I can also fire. So we're both going to be destroyed, but at least, we have that retaliation factor. So there's less of an incentive to fire your weapons, but with the addition of missile defense, you kind of have this interesting dynamic added where you can fire, you might hit me first, or I might shoot your weapons down and fire back at you. So with your question about Ukraine, yeah, I think if it were to turn nuclear, I think for a couple of things would have to happen, which would be most likely Russia may or may not attack like a NATO ally. So Poland, there was a missile that, not a nuclear missile, but a missile that landed pretty close to the Polish border, which had it fallen a couple of kilometers further, NATO would be involved, which would turn this into a little bit of a bigger deal. It's a very large deal, but as of right now, it's not nuclear. I think there's a lot of posturing going on with specifically an attack on the nuclear plant, which is kind of making people uneasy. But as of right now, I'm not that concerned about it. I would say as an undergraduate, again, I'm not necessarily the leading voice on the matter. However, as of right now, it's not nuclear. So I think that there's a lot of different diplomatic ways of going about this, and going nuclear is far off, I would say. However, Dr. Shrum is here, so if he has anything to add to the historical aspect of that, I'm sure he'd be happy to chime in. But yeah, I think I'm actually researching that right now, and that's potentially a topic that I'm going to research further and apply for the next round. So you might get to read about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Shrum, why don't you go ahead? I think you have a question or a comment.
All right, took me a minute to unmute there. Well, thank you all. And Abigail, you've done a great job of articulating your project. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the experts that you interviewed. You've mentioned one of them already, kind of a bit more about what are their backgrounds and what makes them experts. And then the other piece that I thought of with what you were just talking about is what's changed over time is the greater mobility of nuclear weapons, that they're now loaded onto submarines and things like that. So how has that changed the strategy?
Yes, that's a really good question. So the first scholar, Danielle Pletka, so she's a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. She worked in Congress for about 12 years on the Foreign and Defense Committee, and then she moved into more of the public policy sector. So she works specifically she runs their Foreign and Defense Department. So she is kind of one of the leading voices on our US foreign and defense policy. So that's kind of where her accreditation comes from. She's kind of the go-to person at AEI for different policy perspectives. The reason why she was really helpful to me is she was able to get me started on realistically, what do people look at when they're starting to form policy? Because I think as an undergraduate, I had no idea where to start, and she was able to give me a couple of pointers of here's some important things to look at. But most helpful thing that she pointed me towards was the defense budget, which holds almost all of the secrets. If you're ever curious about what the United States is worried about, you can look at the defense budget. What we spend money on is a great pointer. The second individual, Cortes Cooper, he is involved with the RAND Corporation. He is an affiliate faculty member, and he has spent the majority of his career researching. He has a master's in Asian studies, and he currently works in their international and defense section. He works a lot with not necessarily missile defense, but he looks at how the United States defense policy is interpreted in China. So he is kind of an Asian studies major. So instead of looking at the specifics of defense policy, he is more in tune with Chinese defense policy and how it interacts with United States defense policy. That came in handy when I narrowed down my research when looking at the Indo-Pacific region, most specifically the island of Guam, and how pivotal it is in our kind of battle with China. A lot of my paper looks at how previously it was the USSR and the United States poised against each other, and now we've entered kind of a time of great power competition between the United States and China, and it looks at how Guam is kind of this very tiny island, but it's pivotal in US defense strategy, especially against China. And my research really does look at how missile defense right now, like I was kind of mentioning in my answer to Dr. Isaac, there's a lot of different things that you look at defense policy now. It's rather than just nuclear deterrence. So a lot of what nuclear missile deterrence is now is freeing up the United States and other assets that can be used in defense policy. So when you look at Guam, there's the THAAD system, which is a ground-based system, and they're looking at adding the Aegis system, which is a sea-based system. So right now you have 3 US missile destroyers, those like really large ships that are stationed on off the shore of Guam, which are providing missile defense, but that's sea-based. So they're looking at adding a ground-based Aegis system, which will provide 360-degree deterrence to that island, freeing up those 3 destroyers to kind of cruise the sea and provide intelligence and protection for submarine-based nuclear missiles and those silos. So I think what I primarily would like to communicate is that we look at missile deterrence and we think, yes, it's off the ground or it's in a silo in North Dakota, but actually they're everywhere. And it's not just those missiles and where they're at. There's hundreds of different things that the United States needs to look at in order to provide protection for those submarines and those silos, which interplay with geopolitics everywhere. So that's a very long answer to your very short question. But if you have any other specifics, there's a lot I know about it based on this, but I'd be happy to answer anything further if you have specific questions about that.
Thank you, Abigail, for articulating so clearly all of your knowledge. We really appreciate that. We have a few minutes left, I think 4 or 5 minutes left. Dr. Sorensen?
Yeah, I just want to congratulate both of you on just really awesome projects. Lindsey, it's been fun seeing you through the whole project in kinesiology, and then ultimately just how much interest your project and outcomes and poster generated at the conference was just really amazing. I mean, probably one of the most sought after posters at this conference. So just congrats on that. And Abigail, just hearing you for a short bit today, I'm just really impressed by the breadth and depth of your knowledge, as well as your ability to tell stories and really make it come to life. So nice job. I'm just curious for both of you, kind of a big picture question. You know, you're one of the small percentage of APU students that have seen a project all the way through completion. It's really an outstanding accomplishment. I'm just curious to hear, like, what is your one big picture takeaway from the experience? And it could be academically or professionally or personally, you know, what's your big takeaway?
Okay, I think that my biggest takeaway is that it's really fun to do these kinds of research, and that it's also just doable. And you don't have to have like a lot of resources or like a big funding or like something big to like be able to do these research projects. You just have to like start with an idea and then just go from there, which I think is really cool. And you have the opportunity to learn something totally different and to explore a topic that you're interested in.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Lindsey said. First, thank you so much for your encouragement. That's so kind. I think honestly, what I would take away is that there are people who are willing to walk alongside you and invest in your interest. I think that's this started with a small interest, and that flame was kind of lit by Dr. Palm's course, and then individuals at the university were able to come alongside and say, you are really interested and you're going to spend dozens of hours researching it. Great. We're going to empower you to do that, and we're going to encourage you in that. And then just opportunities like this, individuals in the university who show that they're really invested in undergraduate success is so encouraging. And I think a big takeaway is that I want to do foreign policy in the future, and this kind of empowered me and showed me that I could do it. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Good stuff. Congratulations to you both.
I think we've reached about the end of our time for today, but I want to thank you all so much for your participation, for our two students, for doing such a wonderful job speaking about their experience and demonstrating the depths of their knowledge and how much they have learned, which is really one of the reasons we do these showcases, not only so others can learn about your work, but so that the Office of Undergraduate Research can really have a good sense of how much this is affecting students. And we definitely want to continue to encourage students to present their research at conferences. Students can apply to me for up to $500 worth of conference travel funding. And then also our SURE cycle is open again for this year, so we can have a new set of students apply for SURE and continue to support them in their research. I see something in the chat. Okay, wonderful. So thank you so much for your time. And as mentioned at the beginning, this recording will be posted to the APU ORG YouTube channel. So you'll be able to view it there, and you can share it with your family, friends, and colleagues. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Take care.